So good day everyone, my name is Merhart Ilam Alam and today I'm going to discuss to you the topic 4.6 organism in a population vary in reproductive success. So, if natural selection is to operate, it is not enough that the phylogenetic of an individual varies. So, the different forms of character must also be associated with reproductive success or what we call fitness, which individuals contribute offspring to the next generation. So the reproductive success is more difficult to measure than a phenotypic character. Some individuals produce many more offspring than others, or individuals differ in reproductive success in all population. So here, example is the figure 4.8, which illustrates this variation in 4 species of orchids in the form of cumulative percentage graph. So the 4 species here is the Ischoclades bacillata, the Plantes wellandae, Epidendrum exasperatum, and Encyclea cordillera. So, if every individual produce the same number of fruit, that is the same number of offspring, the points would fall along the 45-degree lane. Again, if an individual produce the same number of fruit or offspring, then it would fall along 45-degree lane here. So meaning it will keep on increasing and increasing if only. So you can see here nga pa-increase siya, meaning directly proportional. But the situation is not. So you can see here, the points usually start some way along the x-axis and fall below the 45-degree lane. So why is that? Nga, wa siya nag-uog 45 here, 45-degree lane here. The reason is that some individuals fail to reproduce and a successful minority contribute a disproportionate number of offspring. So here, just like the Ischoclades macellata, here, 5% of its population failed to reproduce. Then here next is the Lepanthes wellandae. It's 35% of its population failed to produce pod. And the third one here is the Epidendrum exasperatum, which 50% of its population failed to produce. And lastly, the Encyclea cordillera, which 80% of its population failed to produce. Meaning, gamay ra gud siya og makaproduce og kuan fruits. So, here. The difference between the 4 orchid species can be understood in terms of their relationship with insect pollinators. Okay, as you can see, flowers of three fruit-bearing tree. Flowers tend to salig sa mga pollinators, diba? So here, the Ischoclades macellata reproduced by self-fertilization and has no use for pollinators, meaning it can self-fertilate on its own. It can produce on its own lang. So next is the Lepanthes wellandae and Epidendrum exasperatum are each capable of self-fertilization but can also be pollinated by insects. So you can see here. The next here is the Ecclesia cordillera, in which 80% of the individual fail to reproduce, this requires insect pollination. It is one of the orchids that evolve deceptive flowers that produce and receive pollen but not supply nectar. So, munang dili some pollinators dili siya modul niya sa mga ingana nga flowers. So, ang himong sa orchid is to cheat the insect, and the insects tend to avoid them, though not completely in the consequence. So, well, that's the reason that only it's 80% of this individual can fail to reproduce. So that will be my part. So thank you for listening and goodbye. Let's welcome Charmaine Arjona for her report.
So good day everyone, I am Charmaine P. Arjona, and in continuation I will be discussing the later part of 4.6. So individuals vary in their reproductive success as discussed already by Ms. Alam. That being said, some members of the population vary in their fitness. Some individuals leave no offspring while others leave more than the average. So it was evident in the comparative discussion of the four orchids. However, there are extreme cases that exist. So we have learned already that if an orchid species are able to self-reproduce and self-fertilize, then the number of fruit produced is similar to the number of individual in that population. But if it requires a pollinator, then the failure to reproduce is more likely since it is dependent on the insect, and if that insect is scarce or limited, taking account also that they are not attracted to those species since they cannot produce nectar, then the reproductive success is lesser than that compared to the species that can self-reproduce and fertilize. So in a study conducted by Hill 1989, 900 individuals of the pink lady sleeper orchid is subjected to a 10-year period observation. And the result is that since the species cannot self-fertilize, only 2% of that individual of that population have managed to produce fruit. So it is very gamay ra kaayo. Then we can conclude that pollinators have been a key factor in orchids. It also reveals that some individuals are more reproductively successful than others. So, however, it is not only bounded and restricted to this species organism. It can also be applied, so the concept can also be applied in any other organisms and species that exist. So, next, a full description of the variation in lifetime success of a population would combine variation in survival from conception to adulthood and variation in adulthood reproductive success. So, individuals differ in fecundity, infertility, and in survival. Thus, a life table should be examined to quantify that variation. So next in the list is that preconditions required for natural selection to operate are widespread. So there are evidences of variation in phenotypic characters and of ecological competition that suggest it. We can find it by counting how frequently those four conditions apply in nature. However, this can render a lot of hard work and effort to quantify this. Next, in almost every species, a high proportion of individuals are doomed to die. This is because there is a struggle for existence, and we all know that the struggle for existence have external factors such as limited resources, competition, and predators that hinders all organisms to live, so that they are subjected to adapt and be fitted with their environment for them to be able to survive. And characters that increases the chance of survival is likely to result in higher fitness, while leaving other individuals and other attributes inferior and at risk of death. Then, the struggle for existence and phenotypic variation are both universal and conditions in nature. So variation in fitness, such as the reproductive success, is associated with variation of phenotypic characters. And if there is a variation in those two, natural selection will operate. So this the good example for this is the industrial melanism that was discussed in our ecology. So we all know that industrial melanism, and the subject for it is the peppered moth. So peppered moth, back in the days, back before the pre-industrial guy, there are different forms of this. The light-colored and the dark-colored ones. And they have coexisted and cohabited the environment happily. However, in a sudden change of that environment, where there is an evidence of pollution, where the factors and industries have emitted black soot and covered all the surroundings black. That is why katong unbiased nga predator such as bird nga sa una wala nagpili kung whether it is dark colored peppered moth or light colored peppered moth, have now targeted the light colored ones kay sila may mas makit-an dali. That is why ang natural selection kay ni operate na because the variation in fitness is associated with the variation of the phenotypic characters, which is the colored now. So to finish this off, it is not logically inevitable that in a population showing inherited variation in a phenotype character will also be an association between character and fitness, but if there is, a natural selection will operate. So because once individual has survived adulthood, then there is a wonder that that phenotypic attribute have influenced its chance of reproductive success. So for our example earlier, the dark colored, which is a variation, have been the dominant in that population since katong mga lighter colored ones have been targeted and ni-diminish na iyang population. So lesser population meaning lesser individual to be able to pass their attributes to the next generation. So ang mas ni-dominate na now is the dark colored one. So meaning natural selection have operated well. So thank you. I am Charmaine PR Hona once again, and that is all for 4.6.